Hey everyone, it's Emily from Cottage Remedies. Today I am so excited to be joined by the amazing Julie McCredden, who's going to be talking about EMFs and radiation and the potential health effects and harm that it can be causing us that we are being exposed to, and most people don't know enough about it. This topic isn't being discussed enough. So I am really grateful to have her on to be speaking in depth about it. And so I will let Julie introduce herself.
Thanks so much, Emily. I'm very grateful to be here talking to you and your friends and your followers to share this information with young people who are our future and also have much more energy than we older ones to do anything about the world.
Yeah.
So I've titled the talk today, Smartphones, Smart Cities, and Compromised People, because unfortunately that's the way it is. Our technology, that is the basis of many things that we are using for life and business and social interactions, is also harming us and the planet. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So my journey with this started when I was working at university. I was actually employed as an educational designer, and I was working across 6 schools in a faculty of social sciences. Oh, and I was also working in engineering. And I was helping to lecturers to improve their teaching practices by utilising modern technologies. And when I started this work was really about the same time, not long after the iPad came out. And we all thought, we knew it was going to be a game changer, but we also thought, and were being told by the industry and educationalists aligned with them, I guess, at the time, that this was going to be a magic bullet and it was going to make students smarter and there's a lot of truth to how technology can be used for helping teaching practices, and we use a lot of those things as leverage to bring about better methodologies and just simple things to help students with time management. Like if you give them questions to answer each week, it makes it easier for them, and give a small percentage, then it makes it easier for them to study for the exam because they've actually been keeping up to date throughout the semester. And you can do all that online. However, what I started to notice was that as far as the actual hard work involved in teaching and learning went learning difficult concepts, which is actually my background, which is cognitive psychology, cognitive science. Learning difficult concepts isn't helped or hindered by technology. Technology can assist with describing the concepts, but it's really the creativity and the ability of the teacher to explain, and technology is the medium. But use of technology can't substitute for hard learning. And in fact, what I was starting to notice was that the students had this cut and paste mentality. So instead of doing the thinking themselves, they were more likely to go and borrow someone else's thinking and cut and paste that into their assignment. And that was actually taking away from their own need to create their own understanding, their own diagrams that join concepts. And it started to concern me. Anyway, after a while, I started to find out that this technology, which, I loved, I was helping to promote iPads, and I was trying to even help develop an app for the iPad so that lecturers could mark at home on the couch instead of having to sit at work on their computer. Anyway, some strange things started to happen around our department, and I started to ask questions. And the university hygienist physicist came to talk with me and explain to me about the precautionary principle. And that's a principle that's used when you have a new technology, and it's used in ionizing radiation. So if you're uncertain that it's going to cause any harm to the humans, then you make it as low as reasonably possible. This is called the ALARA principle. And he said this is not being done. And he'd started to see some problems in other universities with cancer clusters. And so I started to look into it. And surprise, I was resistant at first, but I started to collect more and more information, and it was clear that there was something going on. So a couple of years down the track, Victor Leach and Steve, who's the radiation physicist from UQ, he retired, but he used to work for the Australian Radiation Protection Authority. And he and Steve Weller, who came from Victoria, having been harmed by smart meters, who's an IT guru and with a degree in microbiology. The three of us formed ORSA because we thought we've got to collect the scientific evidence and we've got to see if there is actually evidence that there's a problem here. And Vic basically said, well, if it's 50-50, well, we'll look at all the papers, and if it's 50-50, I'm walking away. It's not a problem. So that's what we did. That's our website there. And we created, Vic and Steve, between them, created this huge database, which we've now got over 3,000 papers in there. And 2/3 of the papers show harm to humans, human biology, the environment, plants and animals. Mostly animals. Most of the studies are animal studies, but there's also human studies in there. And that was convincing enough for Vic to say, yeah, there's a problem here and I need to tell my colleagues in the radiation protection societies across the world, there's a problem. We've been looking at ionizing radiation, but we're not looking at this kind of form of radiation from phones. Right, so it's a bit long-winded, but that's the background.
No, that was great.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So you were going to ask me.
Yep. I was very interested for you to begin by discussing what EMFs actually are and, how they work, because it's definitely something we're not taught about in school or really mostly through university or whatnot. So this would be really helpful to set the stage for your presentation.
Thanks, Emily. Well, yes, because the EMFs, the electromagnetic fields and electromagnetic radiation, I use EMF to mean both, but sometimes I use RF for radio frequency, but they're all coming through the air and we can't see them. Just like, when you switch the light on, you can't see the electricity going through the wires, but it's going through the wires. Well, it's the same as EMFs are made from moving charges. That's positive or negative charges. And when charges move, they produce electric and magnetic fields. Now, science doesn't know exactly why. They just know that it does, okay? So, and when you accelerate these charges, so if they change direction, for example, if they go up and down, or positive, negative, this creates an alternating field. And when the magnetic and electric field, alternating field, are in sync, like you can see in this diagram here, they kind of join here at the vertices. That's the electric field and that's the magnetic field. Sorry, other way around. There's the electric field and there's the magnetic field. When that happens, you get an electromagnetic wave. Now, electromagnetic waves, the natural ones, are actually produced at the core of the sun from fusion reactions, and there's a lot of energy there, but they slow down by the time they get to the outer edge of the sun, and then they slow down more when they get to the Earth. But they're created in the waves, or the energy comes in packets, which science calls photons. But it's actually the waves that we're going to be looking at today. And those waves are in our environment. There we have natural ones that come from the sun, and we have man-made ones. And I'm going to cover both.
Yeah.
So the natural and magnetic fields, I'm just wondering, you can't, if I can get rid of this thing on the bottom, if I can, there's some way I can move it somewhere so it's not blocking the.
What's on the bottom?
Can you see on the screen where I'm screen sharing, can you see my controls? Are they on your screen?
Yeah, but I don't think they'll be recorded.
Oh, okay. Okay,
Yeah.
that's good. So you can take all that bit out.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you. So natural electromagnetic fields are all around us. So as I said, they come from the sun to the earth, and the rays, the waves from the sun, they're coming in. Well, there's a solar wind that comes around and it's trapped by the magnetosphere and goes out as a tail into the universe. And then there's the cosmic rays come in and sunlight come in. Now, the really high energy ones, the ones that do damage to humans, are actually trapped in the ionosphere mostly, and they don't get to Earth. So we don't have damaging waves from the sun coming in. We do have high energy waves, which is visible light. But all the other waves that are coming, the electromagnetic waves that are coming in, they're actually setting up an amazing cycle of moving charge that is used for life. And we know that there's a negative. The Earth is highly charged with negative charge, and the sky is positively charged. And there's a constant movement of charges from negative to positive. This constant cycle that's going on. The negative charges from the earth go up, taken up through the roots of trees up into their branches. And that means that trees attract the positively charged clouds. And that's what brings rain. And so if you cut down your forests, you're not going to get that attraction and you're not going to get rain. Also, humans, when we're walking on the ground, when we're walking on the ground, our feet are negative and our head is positive, about 150 volts. And so there's a whole movement called earthing, where people talk about walking on the ground to bring up negative charge, which reduces inflammation in your body. And it's a good practice to have because you're actually restoring your body if you do it 20 minutes every day. But the biggest source of discharge is, of course, the lightning strikes. So that's when you have this huge buildup of positive charge in the clouds, negative charge on the earth, and the discharge between the two. And it's hard to believe or understand this, but somewhere in the world, there's about every 100 seconds, there's a lightning strike. And this striking of this huge discharge, it's thousands of volts, happening all the time around the earth, actually sets up this pulse that's going around the earth. It's pulsing around the whole of the earth. And this electromagnetic pulse is called the Schumann resonance. And the Schumann resonance, the Schumann resonance is actually essential for our life processes. So it's essential for regulating our body temperature, our sleep-wake cycle, and even for DNA to replicate. Wow. And so we can see, it's amazing, isn't it? So there's something that's going on that's, this electromagnetic system that's going on that's essential for life.
Yeah.
So within this, we already, mainstream medicine even understands that we are electrical beings, that our brain has brain waves, which are electrical waves. So, and they seem to be related to different states of the brain. So the ones that you most often hear about are alpha waves, which is the state that we're probably in when we're thinking and interacting socially. and just awake and aware but relaxed. When we start to go into thinking, which is now we're moving up into beta waves. So for concentrated, for beta, for thinking and learning, and then for deep focus, we have gamma waves, and they're up 30 to 100 hertz, and they actually, it's thought that they help clean up plaque in the brain, and that's why doing crosswords and Sudoku help people to preserve their brains into the older years. And then there's also daydreaming and sleeping. And you can see they all have their different frequencies, and we'll talk about that more later. But we also know, of course, that the heart is an electromagnetic device, and that it's electrical signals that are required to keep the heart pumping. So if we change these waves by man-made influences, then we're changing the basic functions of our brain and our heart. Bees and flowers amazingly communicate using electrical fields. So it's not just the color of the flowers, but it's been found that they actually are emitting electrical fields that draw the bees to themselves. It's amazing. I'm putting the references into a lot of these slides so people can go and look them up themselves if they want to.
Yeah.
So here is an image of, on top of the natural background, we have 1,000,000 times 1,000,000. That's what we have in terms of man-made signals that have been put on top of the natural background.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, that's right. And this is an artist's impression. If you could actually turn those signals, if you could see them, turn them into color so you could see them. This is actually what's going on all around us. These waves are going through us, through nature, through buildings, and it's going on constantly all the time. And on the right-hand side there, I have my non-artist impression of a child sitting in a classroom at school, and basically just what they're being bombarded with 5 hours a day. There's signals from the masts outside, there's signals from the cloud going to their laptop and into their phone, in their pocket. There'll be a modem in the classroom, and they might have headphones on with low frequency electromagnetic fields on their brain, and the laptop on their lap going into their reproductive areas, as well as their muscles in their legs. And all of this is going on 5 hours a day. And the question is, is this a problem? Is this harmful?
Yeah, it's a good question. Very good question.
Yeah. So just to preempt a little bit more about these waves, I want you to understand, so visible light's there in the center. Okay, there it is. But radio frequencies that we're using for telecommunications, that's all down here. Actually, right down here are the frequencies of the waves that we use on the power lines, the big power grids and the lines that go down our street. They have wavelengths, electromagnetic pulse wavelengths of thousands of kilometers long. But then radio waves, their wavelengths are about the height of a building. The microwave radiation that we use in microwave ovens and telecommunications, they're in this range, and they have wavelengths in meters to centimeters. And in fact, microwaves, they were made to cook a slab of meat because it resonates maximally inside a microwave. Well, that happens also to be about the same size as our organs, and the microwaves are the same size as our limbs. So we're actually resonating maximally with this these signals that are being used for our devices. And then a little bit higher when we go up into the millimeter waves, which is where 5G phase 2 and 3 are sitting, it's about the size of insects and butterflies. And as you go higher, then you get into the higher energy waves, infrared, visible light. You see protozoans resonate maximally with visible light. So this is an understanding of the fact that our bodies are resonating with these waves. And when I say frequency, the frequency means how many times it goes up and down per second. So a low frequency has a long wavelength, but it's going up and down slowly, okay? And microwaves are moving up and down more rapidly. And right up here, the really high energy ones that we know cause cancer, they're moving up and down really, really rapidly. And they're huge, they're really, really high frequencies. But even in this microwave range, there's a whole lot of different frequency bands. There's only one shown here, but there's actually a whole variety of wavelengths and frequencies that are used. So they're the ones we're going to be talking about today.
Okay, yeah.
And now the first thing is that when people start talking about harm from microwaves, you will read online, or you might hear science commentators, popular science commentators say things like, oh, sunlight has more energy than microwave radiation. So, it shouldn't, microwave radiation shouldn't be harming us, because radio frequency shouldn't be harming us, because sunlight's much higher frequency, higher energy. And that's true. The sunlight has got a higher energy. But what happens is when the light from the sun comes into Earth, it gets bounced off rocks and clouds and the ionosphere and the sky. And the waves from the sun are going in all different directions. And basically the photons are cancelling, the energy from each photon is cancelling each other out, because they're just chaotically random. But with man-made waves, because they're made by a piece of wire, an alternating current on a piece of wire, making the current going up and down and up and down and up and down. And it's always in the same direction, always. All the photons, we've got millions of photons all going up and all going down at the same time. And we call that coherent. Okay, so they are operating coherently. And so what's happening is you're summing all of that photon energy to get the effect that it has on human biology. So I just want to make this distinction so people understand and don't get fooled by simplistic physics that's being touted in order to try and make it sound like there's no problem. While this coherent type of signaling is not found in nature, okay? And moreover, now with the digital age, it's not these nice smooth sine waves. What we've actually got is superimposed on the sine waves, the up and down, positive, negative. Those sine waves are actually made up of digital signals, 10, 10, 10. So that's a simplified version of what the signals look like. That's the carrier wave, and this is the modulation that's going on top of it. It means, modulation. It's the alteration that's going on top of it. And the reason that's done is because when you're trying to send an image, if you're using just sine waves, smooth sine waves, if you take a carrier wave and then you put an image on top of it, you get the modulated sine wave. The problem with it is if you get noise from the atmosphere, it makes the signal that gets received is hazy. But if you put an image on top of it and you use digital signals to carry it, well, then even though there's a bit of noise, it's still clear what is a 1 and what is a 0. And so the image that you receive is much clearer. And that's why digital signals are used, because it gives you what they call a high fidelity a signal. But the problem is that this pulse signals are more biologically active, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because we're always sending images and we never think about the process behind it and what's actually making the images be that clear, and it's unnatural frequencies.
Yeah, unfortunately, because a lot of social media is images now these days, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that was a really amazing explanation. Thank you. So what actually are the dangers behind this radiation and the unnatural frequencies that we're being exposed to?
Yeah, well, Emily, I warn you, and I warn everyone who's about to hear this talk. Okay, get a cup of coffee now. Press pause and get a cup of coffee now, because microwaves can affect human biology in many ways. And I'm going to try and explain this to you. Now, industry is basically banking on you not understanding this. They are banking on, I believe, they are banking on the fact that this is a complex topic, and normal everyday people won't understand it, and so we'll leave it to the experts. Well, I don't believe that. I think that you can understand these concepts, and I'll be able to explain them to you, and this will empower you to have conversations with other people about what's going on with their mobile phone and their iPad and their modem, etc., and their health. So, as we know, microwave frequencies are being used everywhere now for all sorts of devices, and they're being used, and children are being exposed from conception and to the grave. They're being used just for everyday communications, but also for gaming. They're being used supposedly to help you with your health. And unfortunately, they're interacting with all of our biological systems and the systems that insects use to communicate. So, first of all, I just want to explain the concept of resonance that I was talking about before. I was saying that microwaves, their wavelength is maximally absorbed by our human organs and our human limbs because of the length. So when the wavelength is the same as the thing that it's interacting with, then that thing, it makes that thing vibrate. So resonance is when some kind of energy makes something vibrate, and it maximally vibrates at the energy level that holds the structure together. And a big example of this is bridges. So in the past, it's been discovered by accident that bridges that were, built to be strong and last hundreds of years have collapsed because of them being vibrated at a frequency that they resonate at, that the structures holding them together resonate at, and then they collapse. So the first famous one is the Manchester Bridge in 1831. So it was troops marching in step across that bridge that caused the bridge to bounce up and down, which broke the molecular structures, the molecular bonds holding the structures together, and the bridge collapsed. And that's why now when soldiers, whenever they go across a bridge, they're told to march out of step, because it could create a bridge to collapse. Now, you think, some huge, powerful structure like that, how could something as simple as marching cause it to collapse? Well, it's got to do with the resonant frequency. That is, it was vibrating just at the right frequency that made those bonds collapse. So when people talk about effects, and then there's also the Tacoma Bridge in Washington in 1940, same thing. This was supposed to be a great feat of engineering. And the men who were building the bridge noticed that it was kind of being buffeted around and blowing up and down while they were building it. And I think they called it something like the hurling-gurdy or something like that. But the engineers said, no, everything's fine. But what happened was a 42-mile-an-hour wind. It was just 42 miles. It wasn't that strong, but it was that the strength and the vibration. So it was the vibration of the blowing up and down that broke the bridge. Now, thankfully, no one died. I think maybe a dog was injured, but it wasn't a tragic story in terms of human loss of life. But what it taught the engineers was that frequency is really important, and wavelength. So the same principle applies in all of nature, not just in bridges, that if you vibrate something at its own resonant frequency, then you can tear it apart. And what that means is it's not necessarily the strength of the signal coming in from your phone to your brain, but the actual frequency and the frequency pattern. So in water, I'll just go back. So this is the electromagnetic wave I was talking about before. So in this one, there's the electric field and there's the magnetic field. And you can see they're in sync. And that's going up and down and up and down, positive, negative, positive, negative. And this is how microwave ovens work. So this is a water molecule inside the food, inside your microwave oven. And the water molecule is actually polarized. That means one side of it is more negative, that's the oxygen, and one side of it is more positive, and that's the two hydrogens. And so when the wave is going positive, negative, this causes the water molecules to flip up and down and up and down and up and down, positive, negative, positive, negative. And so it's that vibration of water that heats your food, that cooks your food. And that vibration does, though, is it actually breaks. It can break the weak bonds between molecules. So there's one water molecule, there's another one, and they have these weak hydrogen bonds between them that can actually change the structure of water, which is why for many years people have said when you put food in microwaves, it's actually in water. When you heat your tea in your microwave or your coffee, you're actually changing the structure of the water, and that may not be good for your body. But more importantly, is the fact that these hydrogen bonds exist in very complex molecules. In fact, they exist in proteins, because proteins are lots and lots of molecules that are folded in strings that are folded up in certain formations to make the protein. But what's holding that folding is those hydrogen bonds. And if you break them, which microwaves do, then we get what you call unfolding of proteins. And this is a very big problem because proteins make up DNA. Okay, so we've got water that's being rearranged and DNA that's being rearranged. And DNA damage leads to cancer, and it also leads to a change in gene transcription. So moment by moment, your genes are dictating to your body what proteins to make. And if you change the genes are changed by many things, but if you change the genes and the proteins in them by damage from electromagnetic fields, then you're going to change what the genes are telling the body, what proteins the genes are telling the body to make. And that can create all sorts of mutations everywhere. Now, evidence for DNA damage, it's been found several times, but the one that I want to bring to your attention today is the huge European Union reflex study in 2004. Now, there were 12 institutions involved in this study, and it was led by Professor Adelkofer, a huge study. And they used this test called the COMET assay. And what they do is, up on the top left, you see sham. Well, sham means it's the control, it's not being radiated. On the top right is a cell that was being radiated by gamma radiation. That's the stuff I'm talking about that's comes from nuclear reactors, and it's used in medicine for radiation treatment. But we know that gamma X-rays and gamma rays are in large doses. We know that causes cancer. So the problem is, and cell death. And the problem is that what we can see here is that RF EMF, that's radio frequency signals from your phone that the same thing, 1.3 watts per kilogram, which is below the Australian standard, that created the same effects as this really high energy gamma radiation. When I say effects, you see the tail there? So the tail is DNA fragments. That means DNA damage. And the more tail you get, the more DNA damage you get. So you can see the control has no tail, and here we've got a lot of DNA damage. Okay. Now what happened? This was 2004 that this study was conducted, and the results came out. And instead of it being big news around the world, it kind of went blip maybe on the radar. But then an industry-linked researcher called Lurchel came in and smeared Adolf Koffer, said he had falsified his data, which was impossible. It was 12 institutions, but basically smeared the results of the whole study. So they were suppressed, they were watered down. Now, in 2010, it became clear that his results were sound and true. And then his research assistant took Lurchel to court. And just a couple of years ago, Lurchel had to publicly apologise, and his institution had to apologise for the damage done to Adolf Koffer. And Adolf Koffer died, I think it was just last year. Unfortunately, with this wonderful work that he'd done, being so downplayed and squashed by what we believe are industry interests. And people should know that damage to DNA is a huge issue for all health and for all the future of mankind, especially given that every microwave signal is potentially causing DNA damage. And this was a study two studies were done recently. When I say recently, it's just in the last couple of years. There's the NTP study, the National Toxicology Program in the US. Once again, a huge study. They were looking at what different substances that causes cancer in animals. And what they found with microwave, with signals that were basically meant to simulate microwaves against your ear to rats, near field phone radiation, they found two types of cancers: malignant gliomas in the brain and schwannomas of the heart. And they found these are cancers are also found in humans. Okay, except in humans, those schwannomas are involved in what we call acoustic neuromas, and that which affects human hearing and balance. Okay, so there's the link, but you can see this was a huge study, and it was very quickly followed up by the results from the Ramazzini Institute in Italy, which simulated rats in being radiated from the far field, which basically means from towers. And they found the same rare nerve tumours in male rats. Now, once again, the results of the NTP study, when they went out across the world, many media outlets, which we consider to be spin, to be through conflicts of interest, present information that is industry friendly. And they basically said, oh, it's only rats. It's only rats.
Yeah, dear.
And they said, oh, and it's only 3%. But if you multiply 3% by the population, that's a lot of people that potentially will get cancers from exposures. Now, Leonard Hardell, he's an epidemiologist who's been looking at the effects of mobile phones for years and years. His results also basically show the longer you use it, the closer to your ear you use it, and the side of the head that you use it on. All of these things are more predictive of whether or not you're going to develop a brain tumour. And we know when we're talking about long term, we're talking 10 years. Now, when mobile phones came out, people were only using them for 5 minutes a day and, a couple of minutes a day. And no one knew that it was going to be like it is now, with everybody using it, young and old, and for hours and hours and hours a day. But we now know that it was about 10 years of use for an hour a day. You're in the high risk category. And I would
Oh
say that would
gosh.
probably be most, yeah. What do you think? I mean, Emily, the people you know.
Well, because there's screen time on phones now, and I would say, like, in high school, I would compare it with friends, and it was probably at like the 7 to 8 hour mark.
Wow.
The screen time, yeah.
Wow. Okay. So the closer you hold it, the worse. Okay. And what I haven't told you here is there's an organisation in France called PhoneGate Alert. I haven't got a slide on it, but I recommend that people go and look it up, PhoneGate Alert, because these people discovered in 2016 that the phone emissions into your brain are much higher than what the cutoff should be according to safety regulations. They found that the industry is lying about how much is going into your brain, because they test the phone at 5 millimeters or 10 millimeters or 15 millimeters away from the head. Oh, and by the way, they don't even test it on a human brain. They test it on a mannequin whose head is full of gelatine-like
Yes,
substance.
I've heard that. Oh gosh, that's not
Yeah,
even.
yeah, that's right. So the problem is when you hold it right against your head, that's the worst. So distance is your friend, but that's when we're talking about the strength of exposure. As I said, it's not just the strength that's the problem. The frequency pattern is also a problem. Okay, so we'll just move on to some other health effects. Okay,
Yep.
so I'm just wondering, there's probably, do you know people who are taking vitamin D now?
Yes, and serum, vitamin D. I know
Yeah,
some people, not many though.
yeah. Because I mean, I know that it's controversial, but a lot of people are taking it now to try and help give
Wait, do
them
you want to try it? Just repeat
some
that.
build up their immune system
Do
to be able to combat virus. Yeah,
you want to
sure.
just repeat that because it
So
broke
a
up?
lot of people nowadays, okay. So we'll start from, do you know people who are taking vitamin D?
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of people are taking it in order to try and build up their resistance, their immune system resistance to viruses, in particular, a certain virus, won't be named, and as well as zinc and vitamin C. The problem is that vitamin D, the vitamin D receptor, is actually disrupted by the radio frequency signals from our phones and all around us. So in the top left-hand corner, you can just see where B is. There's a tiny little molecule there, and you can see over in the right-hand side, it's changed its position. And that changing, if you look at this in real life, that whole stringy thing, the whole yellow stringy thing, the vitamin D receptor, the vitamin D molecule is actually vibrating and moving around at its own resonant frequency. And that particular receptor there, that receptor molecule there, is affected by microwave frequencies. And this has been found by Dr. Trevor Marshall, and he's got a great video of it that I recommend people. So the molecule, sorry, this is a biological molecule, so it's constantly moving and interacting. And when we're saying moving and interacting, it's picoseconds, it's tiny, tiny, tiny little time slots that it's moving around at. But there are these hydrogen bonds, okay? And these hydrogen bonds are affected on the vitamin D receptor on the molecule because it resonates at these microwave frequencies. And this is at 3, 5, and 6 gigahertz. We're talking about the frequencies that are used in your modems and 4G light. And what they do is they, as well as altering your vitamin D receptor. So it doesn't matter how much vitamin D you're taking, if your receptor doesn't receive it, you're not going to be intaking it. And it also, these frequencies also block your immune system activation. And what Dr. Marshall has shown is that also that your microbiome composition, if it's disrupted, this, we know this causes inflammatory disease. And he's shown that people who have inflammatory disease, who have autoimmune disease, that they're not recovering from treatment. And he did an experiment where he put this electromagnetic shielding hood around them and showed that this helped them to recover. So blocking the microwaves actually helped them to recover from their autoimmune disease. And he's actually suggesting that in the future, people may have to wear shielding if they have autoimmune diseases, because the microwaves will be blocking their immune system from being able to recover, even with therapies like vitamin D. And while we're talking about hormones, as well as the vitamin D hormone, that melatonin is another extremely important hormone in our body. And it's not just, people think it's produced by the pineal gland, and that's what was thought originally, but now it's known that it's actually it's thought anyway that it's produced by the mitochondria in all your cells. And it's not just humans that produce it, it's plants and fungus and bacteria that produce it as well, and they don't have pineal glands. So it's produced inside the mitochondria, which makes sense because the mitochondria uses it. And it's your sleep hormone, but it's also the most powerful antioxidant in your body. It has all of these effects. You can see it protects the brain and the heart, scavenges free radicals, activates your immune system, prevents DNA damage and cancer, and protects against oxidative stress, which we'll see later EMFs cause. But anyway, EMFs from magnetic fields and electromagnetic fields from computer screens and power boxes outside your house. If you don't sleep in a bedroom next to a power box on the other side of the wall. You must be at least 3 meters away from it. Anyway, these fields, they block your melatonin growth factor. They decrease your melatonin production. They suppress your melatonin receptor. And EMR reverses the effects that your body has because it's creating its own oxidative stress, probably. Okay. If you have oxidative stress and you have effects from EMF, people take melatonin to protect against EMF stress. But basically, these frequencies are reducing the availability and the effects of melatonin in your body. And these are low frequencies we're talking about when we're talking about computer screens and power boxes. There are low and high frequencies in there, but it's not just high frequencies as in radio communication, it's lower frequencies as well. But they're all man-made from digital devices. And this slide, by the way, is taken from Dr. Ray Kearney's slide. He gave a presentation on this. He's from the University of Sydney. So after all I've said about mobile phones, melatonin, vitamin D, I have some advice, which is don't keep your mobile phone near your bed. Look, there's also just behavioural evidence. And on the right-hand side, I've listed some of the studies. So more EMF exposure, there's poorer sleep, greater stress, anxiety, depression. There's an increase in slow wave activity due to the pulse modulated RF, which occurs near the end of the sleep period, and that creates it reduces the amount that sleep helps you to recover from whatever you did the day before. So you're not getting the benefits of sleep. Medical students exposed 2 hours a day showed sleep deprivation and day sleepiness, and after the installation of smart meters in Victoria, there was lots of insomnia and headaches and tinnitus being reported in Victoria. So basically, there's a sleep tracking app. You know, you can put it next to your bed and track your sleep. This is a really bad idea, because the thing that's measuring your sleep is the thing that's harming your sleep. So don't do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was actually talking a little bit about this with Julie before we began recording. And I was telling her about an experience I had with this, because ever since I got my first electronic device when I turned 13, my parents always taught us and my siblings to have it on airplane mode when we slept. So I've always done that. But there was this one time where I put a PlayStation in my room and I had it turned off, but it wasn't switched off at the wall. So the red light was still on. And my dad has a EMF reader or a monitor. And he said after about 3 months of me having it in my room, wow, there is such a strong frequency coming from your room, Emily. It's almost like there's a Wi-Fi monitor in your bedroom. And I was thinking, what? And he came in and he said, no, it has to be turned off at the wall. The PlayStation has to be turned off at the wall. And it made so much sense to me, because I didn't really have bad dreams or anything, but towards the end of those 3 months, for the last month, I was having nightmares every night where I would actually wake up crying because the nightmares were so terrible. I noticed that my sleep was really bad and I was actually having more headaches during the day. And as soon as we took the PlayStation out of my room, or even just turned it off at the wall, it went away completely. And I no longer had these horrific nightmares and this trouble falling asleep that I was having when I had such strong EMF waves in my bedroom.
Wow. So did that convince you that the
Yeah, it
EMF
was definitely
has,
something I experienced. And I was thinking, okay, wow, it makes so much sense. Because this was a few years ago now, but at the time, I obviously didn't know what I know now. I just knew to put my phone on airplane mode when I slept, and it became a habit.
yeah.
But yeah, it
Yeah.
definitely taught me a lot, and it definitely piqued my interest, because one of the first topics that I ever looked into, which I know you'll talk about later, was the 5G towers. That was something that I looked into at a very young age, because I guess I was exposed to the effects of the Wi-Fi
Mm.
on our health. Yeah.
Mm. Well, a couple of things from what you're saying there, Emily. The first one is that it's not a good idea to keep your phone in your bedroom at all. Well, first of all, yes, put airplane mode on and location services off and Bluetooth off, all of those things, and Wi-Fi hotspotting off. Make sure all signals are off. But also just the battery switching in it as well creates this magnetic field that hasn't got to do with the Wi-Fi, and it shouldn't be near your head.
Yeah.
So keep it at a distance. If there's an emergency, sure, you need it in your room, but then you don't need it near your head. You can still put it on the bench at your feet or somewhere away from your head. But most of the time, you don't need it. And if you use it for an alarm, just get an old-fashioned alarm clock, you know.
Yeah.
And if you use it for music, well, that's fine, but have all of those things off and keep it at a distance, and don't put, the other thing is AirPods that connect from your phone into your ear. They don't make things better, because all they're doing is bringing the field right into your brain. Anyway, I'll talk about that later when I talk about what you can do for safety. But the other point is, most people don't know, when they've got their devices on and still plugged in, even though they're turned off at the device, if they're plugged in at the wall, two things. One is that anytime they're plugged in, they're always bringing the electric fields into the room and into the device. So if the device is near you, like when you're sitting near your PC, for example, or your laptop, if it's plugged in, it's still bringing the electric field, or your lamp. It's bringing the electric field from the wall right next to your body. And so you need to have it unplugged, not just turned off, but unplugged. But also, a lot of things when they're on standby are still giving off Wi-Fi signals or Bluetooth signals. So the Xbox is another one, the same as the PlayStation. It gives off Wi-Fi signals even when you've turned it off. And
Yeah, and that was something that really surprised me at the time.
yeah, you would think that industry would, for the sake of children's health or young people's health, you'd think that they would not have signals going when the thing is off. But unfortunately, that's not their concern. Making money it's a business model. So
Yep.
okay, so and yeah, just to reinforce what you're saying, I just want to show. Hopefully, we'll do another talk at another time on the effects, overall effects of this stuff on young people and health and the brain. But just to show your listeners and that there are papers showing effects on migraine, fatigue, sleep and well-being, and sleep disturbances in young people. And look at on the right-hand side, you can see we're talking these studies have got thousands of young people in the studies. And there's effects on mood, mental health and behaviour. And when we're talking about mental health, we're talking depression, anxiety, ADHD, just things that are really prevalent in the society today, and people don't realise it could be their signals from their phones that are exacerbating the problem. Okay, so this is another, we're getting down now into what we call the mechanisms. That means, how does the wave affect the cell or the neuron? Remember before I was saying that EMFs can affect proteins. Well, another way they can affect proteins is that around the outside of the cell, on the left-hand side, you can see the cell membrane there. And inside the membrane are these proteins which make gates. And the gates in the cell wall let ions in and out of the cell. And ions are things like sodium, calcium, potassium, magnesium, chlorine, ions they've got positive or negative charges. And they go in and out of the cell for cell signaling, and also in neurons to create the signals that are sent to switch the neuron to creating a spike, which is then sent from neuron to do signaling through the neurons in your brain. Now, the problem is that these gates are actually, some of them are gated by voltage. That means when they get a certain voltage across them, they will open or close. And these are called voltage gated channels. And there's been a lot of work looking into, with Martin Paul and then with Dimitri Panagopoulos, looking into the effects of the calcium, voltage gated calcium channels. And what Paul has shown is that these channels get tricked by the waves to open up, and Panagopoulos as well in a different way. But these get tricked to open up and move through, so that calcium moves through the gate into the cell when it shouldn't be. It's not the natural process because of the ion concentrations that it's doing it. It's doing it because the gate's opening inadvertently. And when calcium goes into the cell when it shouldn't be there, it's toxic to the cell. Cells spend a lot of time, neurons spend a lot of time pumping calcium out. If you have calcium signaling in neurons, extra calcium in neurons, it will create signaling. It's a neurotransmitter and it will create extra signaling. So this is toxic to the cell, and toxicity in the cell causes cell damage, and it causes something called reactive oxygen species. Now, these things, when damage occurs, you want some reactive oxygen species to help clean up the damage. But if the damage keeps occurring and you keep getting these ROS reactions, and your body doesn't have enough antioxidants to neutralize the reactive oxygen species, you then go into a state of what's called oxidative stress. And oxidative stress leads to inflammation, and inflammation and oxidative stress are now known to be the underlying cause of many chronic conditions. once upon a time, these conditions were all studied separately as if they were their own conditions, and researchers looked at them in a vacuum. But now it's understood that there's an underlying factor, which is inflammation, which is common to all of them, from obesity through to diabetes, through to asthma, lung cancer, heart disease. What's not on here is also depression and Alzheimer's in the brain. So the fact that these signals we're being bombarded by these signals 24/7 means that all of us have extra inflammation going on in our bodies. And the more exposure you have, the more inflammation you have, the more likely you're going to develop an inflammatory condition. The other thing about calcium signaling is that it's a messenger in cells. So it tells the cell to do something. And the opening of the calcium gates is also what viruses do in order to enter the cell and to replicate. So the proof of that is that if you block calcium, you can block replication of viruses. And this has been shown with several viruses. This is a paper from Virology in 2020. Calcium blockers can stop replication of dengue virus, West Nile virus, hepatitis C virus, and porcine delta coronavirus. So this means that, for example, influenza A, it's using the voltage-gated dependent calcium channel to assist with viral entry. And so this means that when you're exposed to a virus and you've got your phone next to you or you've got your smartwatch on, sending signals directly into your blood and your cells in your body, it's basically opening the gates to say, come on in, viruses, make yourselves at home. So it's favoring, calcium signaling is favoring viral replication, but we know that these calcium gates are open by, we believe that these calcium gates are open by electromagnetic fields and signals from phones, masks, Fitbits, baby monitors, iPads, laptops, etc. So this is not a good thing, and it needs to be looked into given the concerns that people have about the spread of viruses in this day and age. The other thing that was researched with regards to substances entering the cell. Now, this study was done in 2018 prior to the pandemic, and this is what I call an industry-friendly study. It showed that they used kidney cells and they radiated them with 18 gigahertz, which is a 5G frequency, but it was also used before 5G. It's been around for a long time. It's used for towers to send signals point to point from tower to tower. That when you radiate the kidney cells, it actually increases the permeability of the membrane. So the membrane's more likely to allow substances across it. And this reaction lasts for about 9 minutes. And this study actually showed that silicon nanospheres could be induced to cross the membrane by exposure to this frequency for 9 minutes. Okay. And the authors said that this is a possible use of EMFs to facilitate efficient transport of biomolecules, dyes and traces, and genetic material across the cell membrane in drug delivery and gene therapy. And this is where permanent permeabilization, so we don't want it to be permeable forever, and we don't want the cell to die. We just want the cell to accept this material. This is where it can be used. Now, I note that the last author of this study is the Australian researcher who's also the head of ICNERP, which is the German-based organisation that sets the standard for how much radio frequency we are allowed to receive. And as I'm going to talk about later, this standard, this level is set way too high. So we're allowed to receive much more than is good for us, we believe. But I didn't understand that why this research was being done, but there you have it, and I'll leave it for your listeners to try and understand it. The heart is also affected by pulsed radio frequency signals. Back in the late 19th, that came out of Russia. Grigoriev, who just died a couple of years ago, he was a mighty researcher in the area of microwave radiation and effects on human biology. He actually was there helping to clean up Chernobyl, and he was really one of the Russian giants. And when I say Russian giants, these researchers and their opinions are not necessarily the opinions of the Russian government. They, like the rest of us, they may be speaking against their government's own policies when they say there's a problem. But in those days, the Russian political system did listen to Grigoriev, and they have much more careful standards that are hundreds to 1,000 times lower exposures that are allowed over there than what are allowed here. Now, what he showed was that when you radiated frogs' hearts at 9.3 gigahertz, which is another 5G frequency, after 5 minutes exposure, when the modulations were the same frequencies, the heart rate, that's when you got the maximum effects, and you got a slowing of heart rhythm, and you got hearts stopping. So these frequencies have been shown to stop the hearts of frogs. And you can see there's along the x-axis there's different frequencies, and 6 to 10 hertz, well, they're the frequencies I was talking about before, are the brainwave frequencies. 1 to 100 hertz is it was 100 hertz that's used in the study on the right-hand side. And that's a study by Magda Havas, who's a Canadian researcher. She came from looking at air quality and started looking at the effects of radio frequency a couple of decades ago. She's a great communicator, and she's done some great studies. This one was with a cordless phone, and it was blinded in that the cordless phone was in another room, and the person lying on the bed didn't know if it was on or off, and they were exposed to the 2.4 gigahertz pulsing at 100 hertz pulse rate, which is like your Wi-Fi modem. I think she looked at about 30 people, but of them, 10 showed effects on their hearts. Not everybody did, but these 10, their heart rate increased and they showed tachycardia. And interestingly, the effect was most intense for young people. Okay, and there's the reference below. So the take-home message for this is a cordless phone was often used, and still is often used, by people, young people give it to their elderly parents. They say, here, mum, here, dad, let me put this cordless phone next to your bed so that if you need to ring me in the night, you've got a phone. And the parent says, yeah, that's okay. And then 6 months later, they have a heart attack. Now, the family says, oh, they were just old. What this is showing is that that heart attack could potentially have been caused by that cordless phone that was put there for their own health and safety, apparently. So the technology, it's being touted as it's going to keep you safe. But in fact, the signals from the technology can be the things that create the condition you're trying to protect against. Does that make sense, Emily?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Have
Makes
you
a lot
heard
of
of
sense.
anyone giving their grandmother or grandfather or their parent a cordless phone?
I would say that most elderly people today do have cordless phones. They just have them.
Yeah,
Maybe they go out and get them themselves now.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. And it's the same now with the mobile phone, that people put the mobile phone near the bed for the same reason, and it's the same. It's the same frequencies, the same pulsing, well, similar frequencies, similar pulsing, and so the effects on the heart could be the same. So
Yeah.
fear of not being able to ring someone in the night um, is being it shouldn't be the reason for putting a potentially dangerous object next to you or anybody next to their bed.
Yeah, of
The
course.
same
So
with the
is it
things.
then a better idea to for those people who do want to be contacted in an emergency in the nighttime to then have a like wired home phone in another room
Exactly.
that they'd be able to hear?
Or
Yeah.
you can have it in that room, like get a nice old fashioned phone that's connected via a cord, which you can connect from the NBN to a phone. You can now connect, or you can get a VoIP phone, same things, connected by an Ethernet cable from the NBN box to your phone, but it's all wired. Put
Yeah,
that.
it makes all the difference because I worked for a year and a half as an admin in an accounting firm, and when I was first starting, I was very aware of all this, and I was thinking, I really hope that the phone is not wireless because you have to be on the phone a lot, but it had a wire and it was plugged onto the wall, so I
Wonderful.
felt much happier with
Yeah,
that. I don't think I would have
wonderful.
even wanted to work the job if I had a wireless phone.
Exactly. And I think, it's not needed. You don't need to have a wireless phone in the workplace.
Exactly. Yeah.
The weird thing is that, traditionally, typically everything was wired. And now people get it ripped up in order to to install a wireless system, which is dodgy. As you can see, we keep on getting your internet connection is insecure. We keep on getting dropouts. You don't get that with wired
Yeah,
connections
exactly.
as
And they,
much. Yeah,
yeah, and my coworkers were suggesting I can just buy some AirPods and I can use those and connect them somehow and take the calls through my AirPods so that I can get up and go to the file room or wherever, because apparently that was happening at other firms. And I just said, no way. I just put the people on hold and I go and get what I need to and come back to the phone.
exactly.
Yeah. I was thinking, are you crazy? Every time you go and turn the microwave on, I'm like standing outside waiting for it to finish.
I'm so glad that you have an awareness and you can teach others around you about it, Emily. And because
Yeah.
people just, take these things on face value and they don't even think about it. And they don't
Yeah,
realize,
absolutely.
this connection between tachycardia and their devices. Because no one talks about it, they can't believe that it exists, because
Hmm.
it's hard to understand unless you start looking at it like we are today. But people believe they take a tablet and they believe the tablet's going to affect them. They don't understand how it's going to, but because everyone says it will, they believe it.
Yeah, of course.
But here, no one says your phone's affecting you. So I'm
Yeah,
glad you.
that's what I said at the beginning, that this is just a topic that is so important to be talked about, but it's just not. It's very hidden and undercover.
Absolutely.
And people also don't want to admit, like, if you actually go up to someone and tell them about how much their phone is harming them or things like that, they just say it's because I think you'll get into this, but there's such an addiction to technology that people don't even want to admit that it's bad for them.
Yeah, they don't. They
Yeah.
don't. Yeah. All right. So I guess on the same vein as having things close to your body and the effects on the heart, this was recently in the mainstream news, but it was a blip once again on the radar. smartwatches and Fitbits could trigger heart attacks. And they found this is true for people with implantable cardiac electronic devices. They also have been shown for years to burn the skin. Some people can't use them at all because there's non-stop Bluetooth pulsing. Now, once again, my concern for this is, first of all, those effects, full stop. But as I was saying before, you put that together with viruses and you've got a perfect storm of damaging cell membranes and allowing viruses to enter the cell and do more damage in your bloodstream and in your vascular wall. That's my concern. And that's not scientifically shown. That's just me putting 2 and 2 together from these different areas of concern that are happening at the moment. But don't wear, I'm saying to people, don't wear smartwatches. Don't just get an old-fashioned watch. I mean, when I say old-fashioned, they're beautiful, and analog watches are beautiful. And
they make you look smart.
I do know how to read the time.
Yeah.
And don't get a Fitbit. It's once again, your Fitbit's there, all these devices are here to measure your pulse rate, measure your heart rate, and tell you your sleep, and tell you how many steps you're walking, But at the same time, they're actually affecting your immune system and your heart rate and your blood. And so the thing that they're taking data on is the thing that they're affecting. And these results can be life-threatening. That's my concern. We're talking about putting this right next to your bloodstream, and then with this virus that can stop people's hearts. It doesn't make sense. Take them off. Take them off now, and you don't need them. If you just get an old-fashioned pedometer to count your steps, get a wristwatch and get a stopwatch and count your breaths in order to work out how many breaths you're taking.
Yeah.
Get an oximeter to work out your oxygen. You don't need a smart device. Anyway, so I'll stop that now, but I'm really concerned.
I understand.
Thank you. So overall, there's now I'm just going to give you the collections of evidence. So the one that we all looked to was the bioinitiative report. A group of international independent scientists and researchers and public health officials got together in 2007, and then again in 2012, and now they've been doing updates ever since 2020, 2022. And they looked at all of the different research in all the different areas of science to say, is there evidence for harm? And they found evidence for harm at 100 to 1,000 times lower than our regulatory limits of exposure. And on the right-hand side are listed all of the different categories where they found effects. Okay, and you can see sperm, reproduction, children, fetal, neonatal, autism, hypersensitivity, T cells, blood-brain barrier, brain tumors, genes, nervous system, cancer, Alzheimer's, proteins, DNA, stress proteins, and nonlinear biological oscillators and neural activity. So you can see basically in nearly every aspect of our being, there has been evidence around for a long time. And we're talking, hundreds, thousands of papers. So you can go to the bioinitiative site to download their report and get any of those chapters looking at any of those effects. Oh, sorry, and I forgot to mention this one, that exposure to mobile phone and Wi-Fi makes cells resistant to antibiotics. So, sorry, that one should have been before, but doesn't matter. Okay, so we have also collected the papers. Now, we are not, so that was a panel, they were all experts and they were writing on their own particular area for the bioinitiative report. We've collected papers on where papers have been published, and we actually took the basis of our database we took the papers from our PANSA, which is the Australian body that has been set up to look into the effects of radio frequency as well as nuclear radiation. But they're supposed to be looking at it, and they've set up their own database of papers, and we used their database as the basis for ours, and then we added to it military papers, papers from other portals around the world, so that we believe that we've got the majority of papers now on this topic since the 70s, but we definitely since 2012, but then we started to go back to the 70s as well. And this slide shows the number of papers that show effects. That means there's a significant result that shows effects when they do the study. And this is only the papers that use real-world devices. So there's other papers where they use simulated frequency generators. This we're not looking at those. We're just looking at real-world devices. And as you can see, nearly every area of human biology it's been shown that there are effects from real-world devices. From protein damage, which is right up the top, and enzyme activity right up the top. Down you can see oxidative stress is right up there too, but all the way down to effects on your thyroid, your liver, cognitive effects, memory impairment. There's oxidative stress, there's DNA damage, there's cardiovascular effects, and there's neurotransmitters. They're just examples. You can see there's papers on everything. And not everything, but on many areas. And the reason there isn't more is because there's not funding for this research. There's just not funding. When people find effects, they don't get their funding renewed in university institutions or medical institutions, and unfortunately. But that is an overall view showing you that there is science. So when any public regulator, any public speaker comes out, politician, industry person comes out and says there are no effects, the chief medical health officer, if they come out and say there are no effects, they're basically lying. It's not true. There is enough science there to warrant concern and to warrant the need to be cautious in what we do with these technologies and try to find safe ways to communicate rather than just to continue to use microwave frequencies and pulse frequencies.
Thank you for that. Do you want to go on to speak about this question?
Yeah, I do. So that kind of leads into when I'm talking about public speakers who say, we've got guidelines, we've set limits. They give the analogy, they say the limit is like the height of the bridge. As long as the truck can fit under the bridge, it's safe and there's no crash. So they're saying as long as the amount of signal you're receiving is less than the height that we set, then you're safe. Yeah. And that those limits are written into their guidelines. So ICNERP is the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, but they're actually not a government organisation. They're a closed club of industry-linked scientists who all reference each other's papers, who all have the same opinion, which is there's no effect. And usually if you get a group of scientists together, there should be diversity for it to be a healthy body. There is no diversity in ICNERP. There is actually one researcher who was in ICNERP, who's been in the field for decades now, who's now speaking out. He left ICNERP a couple of years ago and he's now speaking out against the ICNERP guidelines. And our PANSA is the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Authority, up until a few years ago, they weren't even looking into the effects of EMR. None of them, in both of these groups, none of them are medically trained. None of them are biophysicists. If they worked in the field of non-ionizing radiation, it's in the field of UV effects on skin. It's not on the effects that I've been talking about. And unfortunately, there's a lot of crossover between them and industry-linked scientists and industry-linked funding. So with that background, I'll just show you how much is allowed, how much exposure is allowed. Well, you can see it's actually different for different countries. The graph here shows the amount of exposure that's allowed from normal microwave frequencies, radio frequencies, and it's shown in microwatts per meter squared. And we in Australia, or the ECNERP standards in the Western countries that use the ECNERP standard, and they're pushing for what they call, in quotes, harmonisation for everyone to use their standards, it's 1,000 microwatts per centimetre squared. As you can see, which is the same as 10 watts per metre squared. As you can see, in other countries in the world, they have exposure limits that are much, much less. And countries that traditionally are not technocratic countries, that are not technocracies or corpocracies, I call them corpocracies, that basically rule, there's so much influence of corporations on the government and on industry and on education and research. Countries that have less influence have been more independent. For example, China has been able to, they've had lower limits, and they've also shown, they've got a lot of research showing harm. But then many Western countries too that traditionally were not influenced by as much by ECNERP. So Italy is actually one of the leaders still in this. That's where the Ramazzini Institute is. And they're still leading the way in terms of protective measures where it's been taken out of schools. Wi-Fi's been taken out of schools. So you can see our exposure limits are so much higher than these other countries. And we have this she'll be right mentality like we do with other issues, and we have in the past, like with other issues, like with Agent Orange. We have this she'll be right mentality, nothing to see here, no harm, so that industry can go ahead and the military can go ahead with their own interests. So we are allowed whole body exposures of 10 watts per meter squared. They then divide the body up, and the way they divide it up is arbitrary. We don't understand. There's no scientific basis or rationale for why, but the head and torsos are allowed 2 watts per kilo, including the fetus, 2 watts per kilogram, and or 20 watts per meter squared. And the limbs and the cornea and the fat and the muscle is allowed double exposure, double that. And who knows why? Who knows why the muscle and the bone and the fat and the cornea of the eye is considered to be more resilient than the head or the torso. It's really, anyway, that's the way it is. And these standards that have been set by ECNERP and ARPANSA, the rationale for their standard is that the only effect that a phone can have on your brain is if it heats your brain, or on your body is if it heats your body by 1 degree. So basically these people come from physics and engineering. They've got a model that's based on thermodynamics, and they don't step out of that into biology or biophysics, which is the combination of physics and biology, which is where the effects are happening. The effects are happening where physics interacts with biology, like I was showing you before, where the waves trick the calcium gates to opening. They won't step out of that to look into it. They deny that there are any effects there. And they have this red herring rationale, which is that only heating matters. Now, a normal everyday high school student can tell you that there's more than heating. Energy comes in many different forms, and that heating is one of them. But energy can be mechanical, it can be electrical, it can be chemical, and those effects are ignored by ICNERP and APANSA as if they don't know about them. And industry, of course. Way back in the 1970s, there was a group of naval researchers that looked at the existing studies and publications. We're talking 1970s, right? And they went into the communist countries and looked at the research that had been done there. And because the communist countries were allowing research, they weren't squashing it. It sounds like I'm promoting communism here. I'm not. I'm just saying this is the way it was. Yeah, I don't think communism is a good idea myself politically. I'm not a communist. I'm not aligned with communists. I think it devalues the sacredness of each human being. But they don't have the same. They care more about the health of the worker. You see, that's the basis on which they make their decisions. They want the worker to be healthy. And they set their safety limits based on that. We don't set safety limits until we have dead bodies in the street. So we don't, in the West, we don't set our safety limits based on health and well-being. We set it based on deaths, and we're reactive only then. So that's the difference. And because our safety limits are there to promote industry, whereas I think in the Russian and Eastern Bloc countries, as they were, their safety limits there were to protect the workers, because the workers were kind of like the foundation on which they believed their society was built. So anyway, so this is research from the 70s. So these are animal experiments. They showed death by heart seizure, which, as I showed you Grigoriev's results before, neurological pathologies resulting from the breaching of the blood-brain barrier. Then humans, personnel exposed to microwave radiation, they experience more neurological, cardiovascular, and blood disturbances than people working in the same place that aren't exposed. And the most common complaints were headache, fatigue, dizziness, irritability, agitation, drowsiness, all of these, all the way through to sleepiness, depression, and lack of concentration. So this was known in the 1970s. However, the report went back to the US government, and this is what they recommended. They said, if the more advanced nations of the West are strict in the enforcement of stringent exposure standards, that means lowering what we're allowed to be exposed to, there could be unfavorable effects on industrial output and military functions. So basically they're saying is, even though harm has been found, if we reduce what we allow people to be exposed to, this will have an unfavorable effect on industry and military interests. And that was a decision that was made then. And that is what has been maintained ever since. And we believe there's a huge PR machine behind keeping people in the West feeling comfortable about their mobile phones. In fact, that's been written into, we've seen that written down. And also they decided in the late 1990s to, in quotes, war game the science. That's also written down in a memo from industry. To say basically they're going to discredit the science that shows there's harm, and they've got a huge PR machine doing that through the media, through compromised scientists, through politicians, and getting it into policy. And now, unfortunately, declaring harm may become a source of, in quotes, misinformation, or in quotes, disinformation. However, if we will just present the scientific evidence, and then this is just factual. Okay, so people might be asking, why haven't I been told? Well, I've just explained a little bit, and I'll go into that a bit further because, Amelie, you said your audience may be interested in this topic.
Yeah, of course. Definitely.
Okay. So there's quite a complex web of scientists and government and official organisations that are involved in disseminating the official narrative. And Don Maish, who's a Tasmanian researcher, he's got a site called EMF Facts Consultancy, EMF Facts Consultancy.org. And it's a great blog. He basically puts out regularly information on this topic, but he did his thesis and wrote a book on it. He's got a chapter in a book called Corporate Ties That Bind, which is all about how different environmental toxins, the effects of those have been covered up due to industry interests. His chapter in it called Spin in the Antipodes, which is Australia and countries down here, showing how there's been what he calls the cauldron of suppression of scientific truth. So back in 1998, ICNERP set up its standard. And there was an Australian researcher who went overseas who went from Panzer in Australia. He went overseas to set up ICNERP. He went to the body that was set up to protect against ionizing radiation, a very ethical body of people working as radiation protection officers and in radiation protection science across the world. And he said to them, we need to look at this non-ionizing radiation, this microwave radiation. We need a subcommittee. And he volunteered to be the head of that subcommittee. And that organisation, ERPA, trusted him to set up, using their own ethical principles, to set up a group that would look into it. Almost around the same time, or a bit afterwards, he went to the WHO, the World Health Organization, and same thing, said to them, we need to set up a body looking into it. And they set up a subsidiary of the WHO called the EMF project. Now, he is in both. As you can see, the same person setting up two different organisations. One, ICNERP, who set the standards, and two, the official WHO group that's supposed to be looking into whether or not there's harm. And then who was selected to be in those bodies were researchers and scientists and engineers who had no expertise in the biophysics. To a novice, a layperson, they may look like an expert because they might be an expert in skin, or they might be an expert in UV radiation, or they might be an expert in microwave levels, but none of them were experts, or very few of them were experts in biophysics, the effect of microwaves on humans. And they've got a reach now into science in many different areas, including in psychology. And these are what we call industry-linked researchers because, for example, in Swinburne University in Australia, it's Telstra that's funding the laboratories and you can see that that happened at RMIT, and you can see that they're not independent because their funding is coming from industry, and they're willing to water down results or cover up results or ignore results. Now, what happened in Australia is back in 1994, when Wi-Fi was first being invented, I remember it was first being tested. I remember it at the time. I was watching it because it was being tested in third world countries. You know, this is going to be a great way of people getting internet to close the internet divide. And at the time, I thought this is a great idea, you know, because it's going to bring communications and help with education in remote places. But the problem was that the CSIRO, that was independent at the time, they found harm. But that report was suppressed. And in 2003, that section of the CSIRO was shut down. And in 2004, an ex-tobacco industry advocate was made manager of the communications section of the CSIRO. Meanwhile, at RMIT, and there was a group set up and given Australian funding to look into, are there any effects? But who was on that committee, who was in that group, was a researcher who was also working for Motorola and other researchers who were working for Telstra. And Swinburne, in 2011, the Chancellor was an ex-manager of Telstra, and that's where the lab, one of the labs is, and still was and still is. And then in the University of Wollongong, the main researcher that was given the funding, a couple of $1 million, to look into whether or not there were effects. He was a psychology researcher, not a biophysicist. He was a psychologist, and most of that funding has been used to show that, to really show that people who claim to be affected by signals, that is, they have a condition called electrohypersensitivity, to show that it's a psychological disorder rather than a real disorder. And the same with this this researcher over here from King's College, Reuben. And you can see here, there's these bodies called nnEMF, SENHERE, the WHO EMF project, and the nnEMF 2020 updates, that these bodies set up. These same scientists are linked to all of them. They're not separate bodies, independent. You basically see the same names appearing over and over again. And there's a paper showing there's about 17 of them, and they're self-referencing. Or they get their students who don't know anything about the big picture. They get them to publish a paper and do the research, and then they put their name on the end because they're supervising. But their students naively go into this field believing that there's no harm. So you can see there's a whole lot of interlinking and a whole lot of industry influence in what is being touted as being, in quotes, independent science. And it's in our opinion, it's not independent science. And it is the responsibility of these, especially of the WHO, that the people look to for guidance, that they speak the truth, and that they are manned by independent scientists. The same with APANSA. APANSA in Australia, that's our body that we look to for guidance. They need to be peopled by people who are, one, biophysical experts, doctors, medical trained people who know this area, even psychologists who know the effects on the brain, who are willing to study the effects on the brain, neuroscientists, not people who are only experts in side issues. And they must not be linked to industry, because if your lab is being funded by Telstra, there is no way you can come out and say, I found DNA damage, or I found problems with brainwaves. It just gets shut down, your funding in your lab. when we looked at the industry versus independent research in our database, this was a couple of years ago, but if you look at the we did a paper on this in 2023. It's in Frontiers in Public Health. That's right. So if you look at the number of papers that show effects, that is, there's some effect of radiation on the animal or the biology, versus the papers that show no effects, and then you look at who funded the paper, you can see that when government funds the paper, most of the research has showed effects and institutions. So that's university and government agencies in the past, like CSIRO when it was independent. But when industry funds the papers, it's 58-42. So you can see there's a lot more no effects relative to effects shown when industry is funding. Now, and we also have another category called unknown, because that's when the researchers don't say who their funding source is. And with those unknown papers where they don't declare their conflicts of interest, 96% of them show effects, and none of them hardly any show no effects. We don't know where their funding's coming from. But it's this, basically, it's been shown time and time again that industry funding is the best predictor of whether or not a paper is going to, industry versus non-industry is the best predictor as to whether a paper is going to show effects or not. And overall, you compare that with what we have seen overall when you're looking at experimental and real world signals from real world devices that I've shown before. 79% of the papers show effects. When you're looking at epidemiological studies, that is when you're doing head counts on people, the distance they live from towers, for example, or the distance you put a rat cage from a tower, and look at health effects. 2/3 of the papers show effects. So overall, there are effects, but they're not claimed by ARPANSA or industry or governments around the world now, who are more and more being willing to roll out 5G. And so this, I just wanted to show you this book. You can look it up and download it from the internet. Cellular Telephone Russian Roulette, written by Robert Kane. He was a design engineer who worked on the design of the early mobile phones. He himself got a brain tumor, and he wrote this book to help people to know what was going on. And this is a quote from his book: "Never in human history has there been such a practice as we now encounter with the marketing and distributing of products hostile to the human biological system by an industry with foreknowledge of those effects." And he's saying they knew and they know, and it's still being rolled out. So, shall I talk about effects on the environment?
Yeah, go for it. That last part was very interesting, especially that book.
Okay. Yeah, so you can download that.
Yeah, I was just reading the passage at the top above the title, which is very true.
What does it say?
About like how often you pick up your phone, and it's all about, whether this is the time that's going to cause damage to your brain. That's what it was saying.
Yes.
Of course, it would be always, but that's what he wrote.
Yeah, that's right. He's saying you never know when it's the time that it's going to do the damage. Yep.
Yeah.
So some of your listeners, I'm sure, are going to be concerned about the effects on the environment. And this is another thing that's not being talked about. And, there's a lot of talk about global warming. And I don't believe that global warming is the major issue. I think pollution is the major issue. Toxicity, the poisons in the environment are the huge thing that are being ignored. And instead, there's a big emphasis on carbon emissions, but not on the emissions from industry, which are the toxins. So there's anecdotal evidence. You've probably seen these types of pictures in the news media of birds falling out of the sky on the deck of
Yeah.
ships on roads. And there is prior research before this happened. So in 2014, showing how electromagnetic noise disrupts the magnetic compass in migratory birds. Denaturation is another word for unfolding of proteins. So that the proteins in hen eggs are being denatured. I would say if anyone's keeping a chook farm, and even if they've got organic free-range chickens, if they've got a camera observing those chickens that's using microwave signals to send the footage of the free-range chickens to all their listeners, to all their purchasers, they're doing damage to their hen eggs. You know what I'm
Yeah. Wow.
saying?
I know. I was in a, fruit store looking at where I usually buy my regenerative farm pasture raised eggs, but there was one brand that it was a new brand that was regenerative farm and pasture raised eggs, but they advertised how they have a kind of tracker on the chickens that tracks how much they walk in a day.
Yeah.
And that's when I was thinking, oh no, they've just kind of ruined such a
Yes.
good product. They're going to all the effort to feed the chickens less grain and more, vegetables, and allow them to eat the worms and everything. But then to have them being tracked with a device that's just
That's an
counterintuitive.
example.
Yeah.
That's right. And that's the word that we're trying to get at, because people who have really good intentions are not
Exactly.
aware.
Yeah. Because they're saying, the chickens are free to roam all day, every day. They walk, I think it was like 15,000 steps a day or something. But to get that data, it kind of, yeah, denatures the proteins of the eggs and
Yeah.
isn't as good anymore.
The other thing I've noticed myself, and this is not science, this is just my own anecdotal evidence, I've noticed that eggshells themselves are much more brittle and thinner than what they
Yes.
were
Yeah.
10 years ago. And I wonder, it's just a question. Anyway, so back to the science, or I suppose it's still anecdotal. So, people have noticed these dead birds falling out of the sky. And I've seen it myself on the Sunshine Coast. Would have been about 5-6 years ago now. Just walking along a beautiful beach up there, but counted 200 dead birds on the beach. I'd been going to that beach all my life, and I've never
Wow.
seen anything like that. And there's a YouTube video I recommend people watch called Bioresonance: Beings of Frequency. And it talks about how birds and bees use the natural electromagnetic fields of the earth to navigate, and how the man-made signals are blinding them.
Oh yeah.
And it also shows, how DNA replicates in the Schumann resonance field. It's an amazing video to watch to help give an understanding of what's going on.
Yeah, I'll link it in the description so it's easy for people to find.
Thank you. That's great. So with bees and cell phones, this is before 5G, it was shown that the cell phone signals would cause a decline in colony strength and egg-laying rate of the queen, that the forages were affected so that there was no honey or pollen in the colony by the end. It creates reduced motor activity of the worker bees, and in some cases an en masse migration towards the phone. And in fact, we've seen there was a photo a couple of years ago showing of a cell tower, I think it was down in South Australia, covered with ladybirds, just completely covered with these insects, like moths to a flame. They're going to it and killing themselves. It also induces the piper signal from the worker bee, which basically means danger, danger, and they swarm. So this has been known, and there's Sharma has written a great book on this. Now, also here in northern New South Wales, there's a lovely fellow called Mark Broomhall who lives up in the mountains near the Nightcap National Park, and up in that area is Gondwanaland. In Mount Nardi, he lives up there, and he loves what he calls critters. So he loves birds and he loves insects, and he's been watching them and just living with them for decades. And he started to notice that something was going on in the early 2000s, that they were leaving the area, that their numbers were diminishing, and he didn't understand. He started to take data on this and collect evidence, and he started to realize that these effects happened when they first put the digital technologies up there on the towers. And as the upgrades have been continuing, he's been seeing a decline in species. And right now he wrote a report on this, and actually you can download. I'll give the link to that as well. So it's a wonderful report where he's shown, the reduction in bat species, bird species, migratory birds, unnatural behaviours, and just not even common species as being now rare or gone, or they're now moving down 450 meters down where they're out of line of sight of the towers. And in 2009, how when 3G technology was installed, he noticed an exodus of 27 bird species straight away. Okay. And then with 4G, another 49 bird species, and frogs and tadpoles. So this is an observational study, but it's showing that these pulse microwave signals are affecting the birds and animals in our most precious places that we want to go to and we want to preserve. Trees are affected, and you can't say by the way with animals and trees that it's a psychological effect. It's like they try to claim that people who say that they can feel signals, they say it's a psychological disorder you have. It's not for trees. So if you have this tower here beaming across a town, this is a German study, so there's a building and these trees are getting a signal. This tree isn't, the beam's just going to the top of this tree. So this is what they showed, that where the trees be protected in the shadow of the building, no harm, but where the tree's being exposed here and here, this is where they see dead brown leaves and branches, leaves dropping prematurely, irregular growth, or they don't grow to their full height. You can see the trees in front of the building are stunted. And the damage is only to one side where the beam passes through. And you can see this now in the suburbs. You can drive along and see half a tree or one side of a tree that's dead and the other side is alive. Now, and they'll tell you, oh, that's got to do with a fungus. But why would a fungus only affect precisely one half of a tree, then not the other? And it's not just the high frequency radio frequencies, it's also the EMFs coming from the pylons and the wires going across I call it the grid, going across the countryside. So they're photos from Woogaroo showing that how the tops of the trees are dead up near the power lines, from high voltage power lines.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. So that's just a little bit on the environment. There's it really hasn't been looked at, but it's not being considered. These towers are being put in national parks and reserves as if that's an okay place to put them because it's away from human habitation, but it's not away from our natural environment that we rely on. And if the bees do collapse, and flora and fauna diminishes, then life on Earth as we know it is going to be depleted
Yeah,
significantly.
absolutely. And it's actually interesting that we're talking about this now because just yesterday I made a post saying that nature is the only medicine.
Mm,
So, yeah, we
mm,
definitely have to protect our natural environment that we live in.
yeah, so that means if you want birds and bees in your yard, you can't have a Wi-Fi modem going 24/7.
Yeah.
But basically you need to wire it, or if you can't wire it, then only have it on when you're using it and turn it off. But it's still, when it's on, it's still affecting birds and bees, and you'll be pushing them out. I know myself because, like you, I have everything wired at home because I'm aware of everything that's going on. I notice when I go to live in a house, I get more and more and more birds as time goes on because they can come to my yard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really nice.
It is nice. It is nice. I move into a house and it starts with crows, and then I get more and more species over time. It's lovely.
Yeah. And then your home becomes a very healthy ecosystem of its own.
Yes, that's right. As well as composting and all that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's just a little bit on the environment there. So
Yeah.
that's
Well, I guess it brings us to the really deep question about, the future that we're kind of heading into, with all this talk about 5G. So what do you want to talk a little bit about what's the difference between 5G versus what we've been living with 4G for a while now? And
your
how this new frequency is going to be affecting us on a mass scale.
okay. All right. So the 5G frequencies, the rationale for them is that they're faster. And so they can send signals much, much faster. And they're being promoted for really that reason.
Yeah.
And they're going to be used in many, many different areas. They're planned to run what we call the Internet of Things. So that is everything talking to everything through 5G signaling. And that's the Internet of Things. So in your house, your coffee pot can talk to your refrigerator. And in your car, you can have a self-driving vehicle from 5G signals being sent from lampposts along the road, and same with buses. They're being promoted, like every new technology is always promoted, has been since the beginning. They say it's going to make us smarter, healthier, wealthier. And now they also say it's going to make us greener. And
Okay.
all of those, none of those things have proven to be true, but that's the justification they tell politicians. Industry tells politicians this in order to get them on side, in order to open the policy doors, and also to get funding. So taxpayer usually funds it. So the problem is that we don't know, and the 5G, the dream of 5G was really touted and sprouted by industry before the devices were made. And it may be the case that they're not living up to their promise, but their plan is to put 5G everywhere, that is from satellites down to Earth and between all devices. And one of the rationales is we can send medical information fast across the world. We can even do remote surgery through robots. And look, we might be able to do remote surgery through robots, but let's use it for that. Let's not use it for everything. Okay, so why is it different from 4G? Well, see, a normal tower sends its signals out from its mast, and the signals get sent in 360 degrees. They go out from every mast out in 360 degrees in all directions, because they're strong signals and you don't know where the mobile phone's going to be. So that's one of the problems, is that when somebody over there is receiving a signal, you over here get it as well, because it's going out 360 degrees. And that's how your modem works at home, which is also why your antenna from your modem, which is also another reason to use wired connections, because wired connections only take the amount of power it's required to send a signal along a wire, because the wire knows what direction it's going in. But if you have to go 360 degrees, you need more power. So anyway, that's just the by the by, but that's how they go. That's how traditional signals go. The problem with 5G is that they can't do that, because the millimeter waves, or sorry, the smaller waves, 5G has two phases. It has phase one, where it's actually using these low 4G frequencies, and they've called it 5G, and it's not, it's actually 4G frequencies, but they're calling it that. It's a confusing factor. And then the millimeter waves are once you get up past 12 gigahertz, up into the smaller waves. And those waves are weak in power, and because they've got smaller wavelengths, and that means they're more easily blocked by walls and by trees, or even by weather. And so what they decided to do was then to put them into phased array. So each one of these in the array sends out a 5G signal, a millimeter wave. And when it goes up and down, the one next to it goes up and down at the same time, and the next one up and down at the same time. So they're in phase with one another, and they create beams. And then it's the beams that are sent from the towers to your car or to somebody on their device. They're not sent in all directions. They're more like, so there's less of it in the atmosphere. It's just going directly. The thing is, though, for it to get to that person in that car, it has to go through that person's head. And the industry doesn't really care very much about your head, except that it attenuates their signal by 8 decibels, and they have to factor that in. But it means that the beams are needle-like. And now, the other thing is that they said this was for the millimeter waves, but they've put see this little white box. These little white boxes, they're not even this big. They're about half the size. You see them everywhere. They're the 5G boxes. And they've been put up on street poles in some places in the world, every couple of street poles. In Australia, not that yet, but it's starting. And they've got to put them, a lot more of them in, because the waves don't travel as far. The millimeter waves don't travel as far. But the problem is that they've actually been using the 5G placements for 4G waves, and 4G waves travel a lot further. So the waves down 5G phase one was down at 3.6 gigahertz, which is down close to the same frequencies that have always been used for telecommunications. They're even using down at 700 and 800 megahertz, which are really long wavelengths. They were originally used for 2G communications. So they're putting these really much more powerful, much more penetrating signals are coming from masts now that are much more close up to where people are living and shopping and going to school.
Yeah.
The signals themselves are actually not, not nice, smooth sine waves, not even digital waves like I showed before, but they're highly, highly complex. because they're so much faster, you know, thousands of times faster than they were in the past. Well, but they also have a larger bandwidth, so they can send a lot more information, and the information is really complex and it's pulsed. And pulsed waves are more bioactive. We don't understand why, but we know that a pulse signal, an on-off signal, is much more effective. Like, that is, the biological system responds to it more. My intuition for this is just understanding, because I understand from the physiological psychology that the human sensory system is set up to receive on-off signals. And it makes sense, because the world that we see, like when you look at a table or a chair, it's defined by its edges. So, you know, where the thing ends and where it goes changes color, or where it goes from dark to light. We have to pay more attention to that, because that defines the boundaries of where objects are in space. And so our sensory system seems to be set up more for detecting on to off, or off is a communications protocol called TDMA. And basically it separates the signals, so one can be distinguished from another in terms of time. And so that means it's got a break in the signal. And so that creates a pulse. And it's that pulse that damages our cells and our brains. And I'll just go finish with that. So the Russians have shown effects of 5G on our skin and cells and neurology. They've got a history of research in that. A famous researcher called, not Russian, Eastern country researcher, Igor Belyaev, has shown DNA damage from millimeter waves. He's been doing that research for decades, and the inability of the system to repair the DNA damage. And there's been research showing effects on skin, and even people who in the past have been more industry linked. There's a paper by Newfield and Kuster basically showing that because the waves come in what they call trains, spike trains, they're really, really fast, and they're spiking, and they come so fast into your skin that the skin is unable to dissipate the heat. And so this will cause hot spots and skin damage. Now, industry and, you know, the Australian iceberg group and Panzer, they say, oh, it's only going to penetrate skin. 5G, because they're millimeter waves, it's only going to penetrate skin. Now, what's the problem with that? I mean, what is the problem with that is that skin is our body's largest organ. It's highly innervated. That is, nerves from the skin go to our central nervous system and to our organs. So a signal that is going into the skin is going to be taken deeper into the body. And skin itself is important. So it's likely that we're going to see an increase in melanomas and skin damage with the 5G rollout. But when asked, well, aren't we going to look into this? The answer was given, oh, yes, we will do the research, but it'll take about 30 years. And meanwhile, it's being rolled out.
Yeah, that's quite familiar.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So we say there's no evidence that it's safe, or that, well, you can never do evidence that it's safe, but there hasn't been enough research into the harm either. But there still has been enough to warrant concern. But because the industry linked scientists, ICNIRP, continuously say it's uncertain, it's uncertain, it's uncertain, and they use that uncertainty as justification for rolling it out, we use the uncertainty as a justification for not rolling it out. So it
Yeah.
depends on whether or not you're using risk management or you're trying to promote industry. Okay, and one of the concerning things about the really high frequencies, so we're now going up into the 17, 18 gigahertz. That's what's being rolled out. But 60 gigahertz has been used, I believe, in places. Now, the problem is that these really, really high frequencies change molecular quantum processes. Okay, so we've got the magnetic dipole of oxygen changing at 60 hertz. At 22.3 gigahertz, we've got the electric dipole transitions between these rotational states. It's changing in water. Now, the weathermen have been saying 5G is affecting our satellite communications, our ability to detect the weather, because it's changing these things. But I'm more concerned, or we're more concerned about the effects it will have on all of life, because water and oxygen are really fundamental to life. And if you're going to change these kind of fundamental processes inside these molecules, then that's a concern. Okay.
Yeah.
So can I talk, before I talk about the big picture, I just want to talk about keeping yourself safe. Is everybody awake?
Yeah. Keep going.
Okay. So I don't want to just be doom and gloom, because I actually want people to know they can practice as much as possible, be wise and practice good hygiene with their technology. So these are all the things. Use wired connections for phone and internet. Don't let children have wireless devices, full stop. If you have to use a mobile phone, use it hands-free and keep it at a distance. There's earphones you can get called earphones to plug into your phone. The last 20 centimeters or 15 centimeters of the line is actually an air tube. So it's only air pressure that's being used to carry the signal into your phone. You can get these in Australia. I've got some links I can give you. I've actually got a tip sheet I can give you. You can put on your site with a lot of this information on
Yeah,
it.
sure. Thank you.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Baby monitors, throw them out. Cordless phones, throw them out. Fitbits, smartwatches, throw them out. Baby monitors are one of the most powerful emitters of Wi-Fi radiation. You want to do damage to your baby's brain and potentially harm them when they're young. You know, we don't know the relationship between SIDS and this, but I have spoken to a researcher who believes that there's an effect. There's a link between SIDS and baby monitors. You can create a wired baby monitor. If there's a tower beaming directly into your home, do everything you can to shield it or move. Clean up smart meters, solar, dirty electricity, and magnetic fields in your house. Get a building biologist to help you with this if you can. It's a steep learning curve, but the links I send you, I'll give you. You'll be able to look things up and try things out yourself. There's a lot to do, but you really start slowly. You can get your own handheld meters to measure your emissions. Turn all your screens off at 10 p.m. Turn your power off if you can before you go to bed. And just have a demand switch for your fridge. Or what I do is you can do is put water bottles in the freezer at night. During the day, they become ice blocks. You put them up into your fridge at night time. So when you turn your fridge off, it just works like an esky overnight.
Wow. So you have your fridge turned off at night?
Yeah, I turn all my power off at night so that I can.
Wow.
So basically, your body can recover from all your exposures during the day. Yeah. So at night time, during the day in the freezer, you put water bottles, fill them with water, and they turn into ice blocks, and then you put them up into the fridge at night. And no one opens the fridge at night, and so the ice doesn't. The ice compartment stays iced over, and the fridge has these huge ice blocks in it, keeping everything cool.
Yeah, interesting.
So there's
Yeah.
no reason to have your power on at night. And, people say this, oh, the power went off in our suburb last week for a couple of nights, and boy, we slept so well because, you don't have the 50 hertz in the wall and all of the electric fields that are going on.
Yeah.
Um,
And do you walk around in the dark with a candle?
I've got lovely lights from Block Blue, which are give off nighttime beautiful amber light
Oh, yeah.
and red light frequencies. That I believe you're going to have Chris Henderson talking
Yes,
sometime
I
soon,
am in a
and
week.
he'll talk about that. You can now purchase those. And they're portable, they're battery run, so you can just pick them up and carry them around. You can get miniature ones for reading a book, or ones that work as bed lamps, and they give off friendly non-blue light, and you use them as a torch to walk around at night if you need to get up and go to the loo or go and get a drink of water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
So, don't put electronic devices in your bedrooms. You use those lights if you can, instead of a lamp, or have everything battery powered. So use a battery powered clock, but not with blue light, or just get an old fashioned clock and an old fashioned radio with a battery instead of downloading off your phone. And yeah, so active wires. So never have an electric blanket plugged in underneath you, even if it's off. It's bringing the electric field. And there's a paper into your body, and there's a paper showing that this is mainstream paper showing when you look at all the factors that may cause autism. This was done, paper was done about 15 years ago now, I think. Where the mother slept was a significant factor. They looked at lots and lots of different factors and found nothing. But where the mother slept was a factor in whether or not her child would have autistic spectrum disorder.
Wow.
And yeah, and so electric fields have an effect. So that means if you're sleeping on a wired mattress and you're near a wall, then the electric fields from the wiring in the wall is jumping into your mattress, and you're sleeping on that during the night. And if your bed is metal frame, that'll be exacerbating the problem. An electric blanket will exacerbate the problem. So if you do have a wired mattress, then move your bed away from 0.5 meter from the wall. Make sure that nothing is plugged in to the wall. If possible, swap out your wired mattress for a reinforced foam mattress or a latex mattress. And stop streaming videos. Video streaming is the highest use in technology. It's the highest use of energy. It uses an incredible amount of energy just to download a video. I think it's the same amount of energy as running two refrigerators. Two new
Really? So
refrigerators.
that's to download a video.
No, once if you download it and
Yeah.
then you play it over and over again, that's fine. But if you're doing everything live, so if you're watching everything live over and over again, or if you're so you like something and then you watch it over and over
Yeah.
again.
So it's just playing a video.
Yeah, playing video.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's better to download something and play it. Same with your music. Download it onto your device and then play it from there. Download your video and play it. Don't stream it because unfortunately we closed video stores because video stores, it was on the CD and then everyone could use it, but now everyone is, millions of people are streaming the same movie, and it's using a whole lot more. So once again, we have to be careful. Like, we have to be good stewards of the earth and its resources. And even those of us who are concerned about health and concerned about the planet, if we keep on sending everyone that we know videos, watch this one, watch that one, and spend our whole life watching it, we're actually using huge amounts of power. we're creating the demand that the industry is using to excuse their need for 5G. You see,
Yeah.
because they're saying, we need it. Whereas, when we were reading books or watching movies on hard copy, then we weren't being so demanding. So just limit the amount of streaming you do. If you get a choice, listen to a podcast rather than a vodcast. Like today, we're making a vodcast because I've got useful slides. But
Yeah.
many people are just talking heads. And if it's just a talking head, you don't need the video.
Yeah.
And there's also things you can do on your computer to put it into eco mode. Anyway, so this
Wait,
is
and I was going to say something about what you were talking about, because there are definitely, well, for me, for example, I really do like YouTube Premium, because that means that any video that I do go to watch, I always leave my phone in another room while I'm downloading the videos, and then I watch them while it's on airplane mode or listen to them.
yeah.
So I always prefer to do that. And with most sites where I do come across other interviews that I want to listen to or whatnot that aren't on YouTube, usually you can download them. But what I found is that Android phones are actually easier and more flexible with multiple different platforms to be able to download a video. It's actually not as easy on Apple phones. It's, for some reason, it's just actually much harder on different websites and platforms to be able to download content. For some reason, Apple just doesn't support it the same way as an Android phone does.
That's good to
Yeah.
know. Yeah. Apple seems to be a lot harder with several things, like even trying to keep your phone. So this is the out and about advice. Actually, I was saying keep your phone when you're not using it, keep airplane mode on and location services off. You also need to keep Bluetooth off now, and you need to keep Wi-Fi hotspotting off unless you're using it. NFC, near field device for scanning, just keep it all off unless you're using it. Location services is found in the iPhone. It's found under privacy and security, which is interesting because it is actually all about your privacy and security, turning that off.
Yeah.
Because it's used to track you, and I've seen politicians where they've requested their own tracking, where it's been shown, where they visited that day, who they had lunch with, what appointments they had. Location services turning off. The problem is that the Apple now, the iPhone will turn it back on for you. And many apps use location services. So even though you might turn it off, the apps are still using it.
Yeah, it's weird. It's all individual.
And so there's all these ways. Sorry, I can't hear you. You've cut out.
Oh, that's okay. I was gonna say, yeah, I have found that as well when I've gone to turn off that particular antenna, that it asks for each individual app that it uses, and it kind of works differently.
Wow. Yeah. So once again, it's probably that the Samsung and the Android phones, they give you more control over the phone.
Yeah, I definitely agree. For sure.
And people also need to be, I say, don't. So what I say to people is, if you're going to have a phone and use it, you can still have a phone and use it. Just do this: check your messages and send them. So disable everything as above, and then morning, when breakfast, morning tea, lunch, afternoon tea, dinner, even before bed if you wish, check your messages, send your messages, and then disable everything. So, and you let people know, I'm going to be checking in my phone every couple of hours during the day. If you call me, I'm not necessarily going to be answering you in the next 3 minutes. The good thing about this is you get your life back. You can actually do uninterrupted tasks, and you can have lunch with someone without being interrupted. You can study something, without being interrupted, or, listen, just listen to music. Anyway, and the other thing is, that you're not being bombarded, because people don't know that their phone is sending and receiving from the towers every couple of minutes. Ping, are you there? Do you have a message for me? Ping, are you there? Do you have a message? And if you're carrying that in your handbag or in your pocket, it's going straight through your body every couple of minutes throughout the day. The other thing is people don't know is that when you're in your car or in a bus or a train, that's a Faraday cage. So that's creating a protective shield around in metal that is actually stopping the signal from getting out to the tower. So that means your phone has to bump up its power output to get through the shield. It's not a complete Faraday cage because there's a window and a door, but it's still a partial Faraday cage. So that means if you're using the phone, you've got the phone on in your car, you are bombarding yourself with microwave radiation much more strongly than if you stop the car, step out, and make your phone call outside the car. If you've got kids in the car, that means you're bombarding them. And by the time they get to school, everyone's tired and irritable because their brain and body is being bombarded by microwave radiation, this little microwave oven that you've been driving in all the way to school or all the way to work, without knowing that you're creating this oxidative stress, this fatigue, and damage to all your cells on the way. So don't make calls inside the car or the bus or the train. Just stop, get out. If you have to in a moving car, open the window, put the phone, you as the driver should never be using it. It's illegal to use it. But if a passenger has to use it for some emergency, just put it at the window and let the signal go out that way. So unfortunately, people who have to have a device on in their car for their work are at high risk. And everybody who has to have a mobile phone on and near them at all times, or an iPad on or near them all times for their work, is in a high risk occupation. I say to tradies, don't bring the phone in when you're doing your job. Leave your phone in the car, because you don't want to be interrupted while you're doing the plumbing. And it's not then damaging your reproductive system, and it's not damaging your brain while you're at work all day. So other things is, listen to all the good advice from all the health experts. Look up and breathe. So enjoy life rather than the digital world. Play music, sing, dance, all of those things. Eat a multicolored, antioxidant-rich diet, because you want antioxidants to deal with all the damage. But it's not going to be enough. You need to do protection and get good sleep. That is, which Chris will talk about, is so essential to try and wake up with the sun and don't have blue light active after sunset.
Yeah.
And there'll be a tip sheet there. So yes, so that's the state of things as they are.
I mean,
did you want me to talk about the future?
Yes. Oh yeah, of course, please do.
So I've actually, it's really, this is all questioning, because I'm involved in this area and seeing how people are using it so much without knowing, without an awareness, and even with an addiction, I have a real concern for where we're heading. So we have this brave new world plan for us, not just the Internet of Things now, but the Internet of Bodies. And this comes from an industry paper. This is not me talking about any conspiracy theory. This is the plans. Okay, and all of the different things that we can have that are electrical and sending signal. For example, an electronic tattoo, wearable headsets. You can have prosthetics that send signals to and from your brain so you can control them remotely. Baby diapers, baby nappies. Who needs a Wi-Fi or Bluetooth signal in the baby nappy to tell them the baby's nappy is wet? The baby tells you. They cry.
Oh my gosh. Jeez.
How ridiculous. But also, and all your sports equipment and all your sports wear to tell you, how you're moving and how you're walking, and glasses to do. They're going to sell it for meditation, and they're going to sell it for health, but it's going to be doing and entertainment, but it's going to be doing brain damage. And not only that, the closer you put this stuff to your body, the more you can be monitored, the more data can be taken about you, and the more you can be controlled remotely. So think, I ask people, do you need all this stuff? Think about what you want. You can get a game where a child can control a robot, or a child can go outside to learn how to do their own somersaults. That's the way it was when I was growing up. Boys learned to do somersaults in the air. Now they learn to control them. But more than that, when we're also now trusting that, we're going to be able to use robots to help us in the future. And of course, we're making ourselves so sick from the chemical toxins and the electromagnetic fields affecting all of our cells and our gut biome and our sleep, everything, that there's going to be a market for the robots that are coming to assist us, because we won't be able to do things for ourselves. But all of that remote stuff will still use these signals, unless we do something differently. So this is planet Earth. This is planet Earth right now, and this is the plan for us, that everything is connected to everything. And people looking at these pictures, this is what they want. They want this connectivity. It's a world of neon lights. Can you see the trees? Can you see the flowers? Can you see the blue sky? Can you see the birds and the bees in this picture?
Nope.
No. I just think, whose wet dream is this? And I believe that mankind is at a crossroads. Back when we had the Reformation, what are we talking? The 1600s. We're talking when mankind, realized that the church was being used, not God, but the church was being used to control, to make money, for people were living in fear, and they were blindly obeying rules made by church leaders who hadn't read the Bible, who just gave any laws that they wanted to, and said to people, you can do whatever you want as long as you pay money to us, and then God will forgive you. They were acting like mini gods on earth. It was evil, and it wasn't written in the Bible, and it wasn't God's way. But in the Enlightenment, Martin Luther posted those things up on the Sistine Chapel, those principles of protest, and people started to, and then they translated the Bible, and people started to, and there was a printing press, started to educate themselves and become aware, and the working classes grew, so that the middle classes grew, so that, and people started to think for themselves and realize, they realized, here's this beautiful painting in the Sistine Chapel, that, God was reaching out to touch man. That's what the Christian faith was for, that, that God wants to touch us, and he's given us a way that he can do that. And I believe he sent his son so that we can be forgiven, so that we can reconnect with him and be at home with our Creator and not be afraid. Now, along came, the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment grew into the discovery, or many scientific discoveries. And as time went on, then along came creationism and scientism, where people started to believe, oh, we don't need God anymore. We can do it on our own. Thank you very much. All this proves is that we don't need a creator, which is actually crazy, because if you take the Big Bang Theory, all you're doing is shifting the creation back to the Big Bang. You still need to create everything out of nothing. It's wherever you put them, you've got to put the miracle somewhere. And there was a miracle. Okay. But anyway, but people started to believe, well, we don't need God anymore. And then science, it became almost like science is going to save us. And then science changed into technology. And now people almost live as if technology is going to save us. And that's what we're told in message after message after message. Right now, technology is going to make us more green, even though we know that the rollout of 5G is going to take 10 times more power. So why do we need this, all these extra power lines across the country? Why is the cost of power going up? Because we're using so much more power to run the 5G technologies. But we are told that it's going to make us green. And even the green parties think that they're bamboozled, and they think technology is going to save us. So we've moved away, thinking we're so sophisticated. We've moved away from understanding we have a divine God-given nature and a creator who's trying to reach us, trying to touch us, trying to bring us into a more full way of being, to what is called the singularity prosperity. And this is an image from an industry video describing what is 5G. And this is their dream, that we won't be anymore reaching out to touch the Lord God, but we will be reaching out to touch the robot. And who is the creator and who is the created in this? And who is the savior and who is the saved? You know, it's like we're reaching out to technology to save us. And the singularity prosperity means basically we're going to have one world system where all the information is all connected into one big, like a global machine, which is, you can see the AI systems are moving towards that. And everything is connected to everything. And with that singularity comes prosperity for those who are already, you know, the managers of the world, and greater management ability. And I call this the darkening. So we've moved from the enlightenment into the darkening. And we're at this crossroads now where each person has to decide, which way do I want to go? But we also need to be having these conversations as a society, rather than letting a small handful of people, technocrats and gurus like the Musks of this world, make those decisions for us, because their interests are, they might be focused on loving technology more than they love humanity, or loving prosperity more than they love humanity and the environment. They should not be our elders. And our turning away, I believe that turning away from our Lord has turned us to a fake creation, a fake creationism where we've created ourselves. And is that the way we want to go? Is that what people want for themselves and their children? So, having said all that, there's the further information, but I will give this to Amelie, and you can put it in the links below, can't you? All of the resources.
Yeah, I'll do that.
That I give you. Okay, so there we go. We've come to the end. Is anybody still awake?
Brilliant. No, that was just amazing, Julie. Thank you so much for that. I, in that presentation, learned so much, especially. So I'm really grateful for you taking the time to put together that presentation. And I'm sure maybe at the end of this, some people are feeling a little bit uncomfortable right now knowing that they're sitting in all these frequencies if they don't have their house or home set up how it should be. But you gave a very detailed explanation of how we can actually find a solution to the problems that we're facing. So it's really helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you for listening and persevering, and thank you to everyone who has persevered right to the end.
That's all good. And I also did want to ask, just in case anybody did want to reach out to you or contact you, did you have a way that they could do that you would want to share? Or
Oh, well, yes, on the ORSA website is we have our email, our contact email address there, contact at ORSA or info at orsa.org. But also in the list of resources that I'm going to give you to put on there, like the tip sheet, there are organisations that you can contact if you have specific concerns. So, for example, if you've got a smart meter in your house and you're worried about the effects on your brain, in your body, in your children, you can go to Stop Smart Meters Australia. If you want to go and find more information and purchase meters or protective materials or like I said, earbuds, you can go to either Building Biology Australia or EMR Australia. EMR Australia, both of those, Lynn McClain and Nicole Bilsma have also written books. Lynn McClain's book is Happy Healthy Homes, and telling you a very simple little book, telling you what to do. And both of them have information on their sites and further links. And I've got further links to Trust, which has got lots of videos and downloads, and a site for pregnant women called the Baby Safe Project. And then there's the Less EMF Safety Store where you can order things from, and other stores where you can order. In Australia, we've got Rad Smart, and over in the UK, and there's LeBlock. There are only some of them, and I'm not making money from any of these, and I'm not affiliated. I've got no conflicts of interest in promoting these things. They're just the ones that I know of that you can go to get protective materials, but also to find out more and educate yourself more. So there's a lot of resources there too for people, and people often contact us saying, we've got a 5G tower and we want to protest against it. Well, there's an Australian party called No 5G, and they're set up to stop 5G. But I think they've changed their name now, and I think and there's hopefully I think they're now affiliated with the Health Australia Party, which also have protective policies against chemical toxins and electromagnetic fields. And so No 5G is headed by Barrister Broomhall, who tries to fight against towers. But yeah, so there is stuff going on. There's a couple of doctors around the place that can help people who think they've been harmed. Dr. Russell Cooper in Tasmania. But anyway, so there are a lot of resources, as well as myself, as well as also. But see, we're more focused on the science. We're not focused on the activism, and there are other groups for activism, but if you contact us, we can refer you on to those people. But also look at the resource sheet, because there'll be lots and lots of resources there for you to follow up and get help. And if anybody also is involved in little groups around the place that want talks on this topic, that's what we do. So
brilliant.
Thank you.
That's fantastic. So I'll put I think YouTube's actually got a limit to the description, so I might end up just making a page, and you can get all the links that Julie will send to me on there, because I think we've got a lot of resources to fit in.
Yeah.
But thank you so much anyways. And I'm just really grateful for you coming on. I'm really glad that we had this discussion. It's going to be so helpful for all the people that will be watching.
Thank you, Emily, and bless you in your work that you're doing.
Thank you.